throughout history, mankind has always been storytellers. We've always been good. Every culture, every nation, we've always been good at telling stories. And the Bible, even though it's inspired by God, is still at its heart just a story. And it follows the same basic elements that every story follows. It has a beginning and it has an end. There's a conflict and there's a resolution. Well, for the Bible, the conflict is introduced right at the beginning. Adam takes a fruit, he eats it, he disobeys God, and sin and death enter into the world. That's the essential conflict of the Bible. And throughout the rest of the book, God's going to be slowly revealing how he's going to fix or solve this problem. Now, in every story, there's a protagonist and an antagonist. Someone who represents good or working towards the resolution, and someone who represents evil or is not interested in resolution. Well, in the Bible, it's always mankind that is the antagonist. We're the ones who are not interested in resolving our relationship with God, and God is the one who works to resolve with us. If you read the book of Genesis, just the book of Genesis on its own, it follows the same plot line that all stories follow. In the beginning, we have the introduction of conflict. Sin and death come in. And throughout the rest of the book, God's going to be slowly unveiling and revealing how he's going to fix the problem that was introduced. And so we see through the lives of Noah and Abraham and Isaac and Jacob how God is slowly beginning to reestablish a relationship with man again. But throughout it all, the people, those men, at different points in their lives show that they're not really interested in actually fixing things with God, in actually giving up sin. Abraham is a liar and Jacob is a trickster. It isn't until we meet Joseph right at the end of the book of Genesis that we finally meet someone who is really dedicated to living right before God. In fact, Joseph is one of the few people in the whole Bible who doesn't have any sin recorded in his life. Moses killed a man and David took a wife who wasn't his, but Joseph, he actually doesn't do anything wrong that we find in the text. So it would seem, just reading the book of Genesis, it would seem that in the life of Joseph, we're actually about to see the resolution to the conflict that was introduced in the beginning of the book. Sin comes into the world at the beginning, and Joseph seems to live a righteous life. But the book of Genesis ends on an interesting note. The very last verse of the book simply says that Joseph died, and they buried him in a coffin in Egypt. That's how the book ends. So that story, the story of Genesis, actually ends under the very same curse that it began with. That means that Joseph never saw a resolution to the problem that was introduced at the beginning of the book. It's a plot line, but a plot line without an end. It's a story that doesn't finish, a story that has no resolution. And that's exactly how the Bible is written. God has shown us what the conflict is, sin. But he doesn't show us the resolution, at least not yet. You have to go on and read Exodus, but you won't find the resolution there. And then Leviticus and Numbers and Deuteronomy, and God's plot continues to unfold. He continues to unveil how he's going to solve the problem of sin, how he's going to reestablish his relationship with humanity, but it doesn't really take place until we hit the New Testament, until we see Jesus on the cross. But even when Jesus dies on the cross, the story isn't finished yet. We don't see everything resolved or brought back to what it was at first with Adam and Eve in the garden. This is a story that is open-ended. The Bible is a story that we are invited to be a part of. And so we are left at the end of Genesis, we're left in anticipation that someday the relationship between God and man will be resolved. And to this day, we live in anticipation that that relationship still can be resolved. It's a story that we're invited to be a part of before it comes to its conclusion at the return of Christ. Until Jesus comes again and actually establishes his throne here on the earth, we won't have what Adam and Eve had in the garden. And so until that happens, we are invited to step into and live as a part of the story that the Bible has been telling since the beginning of time.